Describe the scariest moment of your life. Story 1. I used to work at a Jewish bakery. We sold cakes and bread and a whole bunch of cookies. I worked on Sundays and Mondays, taking it easy with school during the week as a high school senior. On December 18th, 2006, a guy walked in and asked about applying for a job. I wasn't sure what was up with the hiring periods at the time, so I went to get my manager to ask about the process. She gave me the usual, get his info, and we'll keep it on file. So I went back upstairs with a pen and paper. He let me know that he would write down his contact information in the car, and then come back in a few minutes. Still, this was only 5 minutes before closing on a slow Monday night, so I figured I'd never see him again. No problem. To my surprise, the man comes back in just as we were getting ready to lock the doors. I'm basically ready to go at this point, standing behind the register and waiting for the clock to hit 7 p.m. As the man hands me the paper with his scribbled information on it, he asks me, "Do you want to live to see Christmas?" I said, "What?" He pulled a gun out of his right pocket. It's hard to describe the feeling when you see a gun drawn on you, but I remember feeling blood rush all the way up to my head from my feet, or maybe it was the other way around. I forget, but it was ridiculous. After he pulled the gun, he half-assedly lifted a bandana over his nose and mouth, even though several cameras and 2 employees had already seen his face. He would be very easy to pick out of a lineup too, as the whites of his eyes were yellow, and he was missing his front right tooth. The man ordered me to bring him to the safe, which was non-existent. I knew that there was money downstairs though, so I just started walking into the kitchen with him following me. I didn't have my hands raised or anything, but I remember saying something like, "Please don't shoot anybody." He told me that no one would get shot if they just did what he told him. I followed me down a flight of stairs and into the long hallway that we had, going towards the office where my manager and her boyfriend were working on balancing the registers for the night. My manager was just exiting the bathroom as we walked towards the office, and she definitely caught a glimpse of his gun because she screamed and ran into the office. She sort of barricaded herself in the small room with her boyfriend, so I instantly thought I was messed. Nope. The thief kicked the door in and started yelling. When the door opened, I saw my manager holding the phone, halfway through dialing 911. The robber ripped it out of her hands and threw it on the ground really hard. It shattered into pieces. Crazy. He told everyone to get on the ground and yelled that he wanted all the money from the safe, and my manager told him that we didn't have a safe. That's basically exactly what the guy didn't want to hear at the time. So I reminded her that there was a shitload of money in the filing cabinet behind her. I don't think I was supposed to know about it, but whatever. It worked. She put his money in a manila envelope, probably around $700 from what I remember her saying, and he told me that he wanted me to escort him back upstairs. I basically thought I was gonna die at this point. As we walked up that long hallway, with every step I took, I pictured what the crime scene would look like. Evidence photos with a dead 18-year-old sprawled out in a pool of blood, gunshot to the back of the head. Not great. We both walked up the stairs and I knew that it was gonna be over soon. I didn't know how it would end, but I wanted to go home at some point later that night. As we passed the back exit through the kitchen, I told him that he should leave through the back alley. That way no one would see him. He didn't like the idea but didn't say anything. He left the store through the front entrance where he entered from. Before leaving, he told me not to call the cops and to go back to the office and stay there. I got back down to the office where my manager was already on the phone with the police. I watched the guy walk out the door in the security cameras upstairs, at which point I ran out the back exit from the kitchen into the store next door to ours. It was messed up like crazy, and I had to spend 30 to 45 minutes talking to the police after everything was over. I did in fact get to go home later that night, and I remember telling my friends about what happened while killing locusts in Gears of War. The robber was sentenced to 12 years and 1 day in prison, but not just for my crime. He committed about 16 robberies total in the area, so he was definitely at large when he hit the bakery I worked in. Side note, I'm a skinny white kid who wouldn't hurt a fly. I was messed up for a while after. I spoke with a therapist for maybe a month or 2, at which point I tried to get out of going because I couldn't stand the awkward silence when talking to the guy. Also, he had a calendar with naked African tribe members posing, which made me lol for some reason every time I saw it. Also, please note that I'm not a writer, and there's most likely a bunch of stuff I did incorrectly in telling the story. I figured it was better to put it down in at least some form rather than not at all. Wow, that is a crazy story. I can't even imagine what it must have felt like to have a gun pointed at you like that. I'm glad you made it out safely and that the robber was caught and brought to justice. It's great that you sought help from a therapist, even if it didn't end up being the best fit for you. It takes a lot of strength to go through something like that and come out the other side. And hey, if a calendar with naked African tribe members posing can bring a little bit of humor into the situation, I say go for it. Story 2. About a year ago, I was at a neighborhood park with my 3 kids, age 4, 2.5, and 1. It's a pretty good-sized park that has new play equipment, plenty of shade, is well maintained, and is full of young kids and their parents. In fact, it's almost perfect, like something out of a movie. Except for the fact that it's not 100% enclosed by a fence. This is kind of a problem, because a fairly busy street runs right alongside it, and the worst part about it is that it's a one-way street that serves an off-ramp from a highway, as well as 2 other major streets. When cars come down, it's often after a 10-second break, followed by 15 to 20 cars speeding at around 30 to 45 miles per hour. So I'm in the middle of the park helping my youngest daughter with something, and periodically looking to check on the location of my 4-year-old son and 2.5 daughter, Izzy, to make sure that they're both well within the bounds of the park. I think I had my eyes off of Izzy for maybe 10 seconds, and when I looked up, she's running at full speed towards the street. Now, I'm a fit, athletic guy, so normally I would have been able to reach her in time, but she was running so fast and had picked up so much ground while I had my eyes off of her, that even though I sprinted after her as fast as I could, I knew I wouldn't be able to stop her before she reached the street. As I was sprinting, I'm screaming at her to stop. But being a 2.5-year-old kid, she wasn't inclined to listen. I was so terrified that I became lightheaded knowing what was about to happen. But even though I ran as fast as I could, screamed at her as loud as I could, and mentally tried to convince her to stop moving, she would not stop and ran right into the middle of the street. My heart stopped. Time stopped. My gut clenched and the blood drained out of my body. I couldn't hear anything, and all I could see were her blue eyes as she stood in the middle of the street smiling back at me. There was nothing left. My life had ended. But it hadn't. I got to her about 3 seconds after she stopped and snatched her off the ground at full speed, without even thinking to see if there were cars coming. Unbelievably, she ran into the street while there happened to be a gap in traffic. Was it luck? Or was I just dreaming, or maybe hallucinating? For a minute or so afterwards, I hazily wondered if she'd actually been hit by a car, and if maybe my mind was just trying to replay the past with an alternate ending. But no, this time Izzy had escaped the jaws of death and was alive and safe. It's a parent's worst nightmare to think that their child could be hurt, or worse. It's amazing that they were able to sprint so quickly and snatch their child up just in time. It sounds like they were so scared that they became lightheaded and couldn't hear anything. It's understandable that they would question whether it was just luck or hallucination that their child wasn't hit by a car. Story 3. Okay, fair warning, this is a story about being crazy. In my freshman year of college, I was sitting alone in the basement of the dorms at 3 in the morning. I was basically having a freak out because I didn't have a support network in place yet and was so very lonely. Yeah, going into the basement in the morning when feeling lonely ain't exactly the best way to cure that, I know. But I wasn't quite thinking straight. Sometimes, when you are depressed, you just lock yourself into a cycle of self-hate and the like and retreat from the world. So I'm depressed, sensory deprived, and I've exhausted myself crying and hitting things. I decide it's time to go back to my room to sleep. So I punch the elevator button, and when it gets there, the door's open. Nothing is in the elevator, but something gets off it. So I'm looking at this entity, whatever it is, and it becomes clear to me that this is my evil self. Basically, hate given form, purpose, and will. It was here to destroy me. And I flip and start running up the stairs screaming. I get to the ground floor, run outside past the security before they stop me, and get out into the parking lot. It has followed me. I scream at it, forcing with my mind into the ground, under the asphalt, where apparently it will stay or something. I succeed at this long enough to calm down and walk back to the dorm. Security should have checked my ID badge, but no one wanted to stop the crazy guy. I get to my room, but standing at the door, I realize that it's inside my room, and if I go in there, I'm probably gonna kill myself. So I try to go back downstairs, but I get the same feeling of presence at all the stairwells and elevators. I can't get to any of my friends' room now, and I didn't really feel I had any. The whole problem, really. So I wound up sitting in the hall, rocking back and forth, muttering until my RA showed up. Basically, despite never having taken drugs, I know exactly what a bad trip is like. I hallucinated the whole thing, to be sure, but it's still the scariest moment of my life. Oh man, that is one wild story. I can only imagine the terror you felt in that moment. But hey, we all have our crazy moments, right? And it sounds like you learned a valuable lesson about taking care of yourself and seeking out support when you need it. I'm glad you had an RA there to help you out. And now, you have a crazy story to tell at parties. Just remember, it's okay to not be okay sometimes. We all need a little help and support every now and then. Story 4. Adulthood Scary Stuff, 2002. New son, new wife, new life. Living it up in the hills of West Virginia. Poor, but proud, and having a good time. Shortly after 9/11, me and the wife make some really good chili together, and we decided to do a batch for that night. Anyway, my 1-year-old decides he would like to help, but of course, that's not a good thing for a baby to do. This led to me picking up the baby several times by the armpits and sending him on his merry way out of the room. Chili is done, hot and boiling. Dinner is being served. I had my hands on the soup bowls, and my wife was pouring out sweet tea, and neither one of us was able to drop everything in time to stop our 1-year-old from pulling the entire 2 gallons of boiling chili on top of himself. I was able to deflect the container a bit as it dropped, so it just barely missed his face and upper body, but a good liter or so soaked his left arm up to his shoulder, and I snatched him up, probably too roughly. I could literally feel the first few layers of skin on his arm just immediately start to peel off in my fist. We dropped everything, stood him in the shower for a few minutes, and as his arms just continued to bubble and peel, we finally decided that it would be better to just hop in the car than to wait for an ambulance to arrive. So that's what we did. We drove down there with our hazards on, and with absolutely no concern for any traffic laws or consequences thereof. Of course, he is fine now. He's even got a cool skirt to show for it. Though now, of course, it is pathetically small. But that moment when it happened, it was breathtaking. And I'm wise enough to know what could have happened had it hit him full force on the chest or face. So, you have to be grateful, even when tragic things happen, because those things, bad as they are, could always be more tragic. Story 5. One time when I was a kid and sleeping at my friend's whose parents were on a cruise, I was woken up by noises. Their house had 3 floors and very squeaky stairs. I could hear noises from both of the floors beneath us, sounds of cupboards being opened and closed, all of them one by one. I lay there for the longest time, listening to them search every place, and climb up the stairs to the floor where we were sleeping. I'd been too scared to open my eyes, but when I did, I saw light coming from the hallway, and I was the one who switched it off when we went to sleep. I kept my eyes closed when they reached the 3rd floor where we were sleeping. The other one proceeded to my friend's parents' room on the other end of the hallway, and the other one silently pushed the door open. It had been only ajar before. I pretended to be asleep. I was sure that if he noticed I was awake, he would shoot me. He stood in the doorway, breathing, for over 2 minutes. I could hear him breathe. I could feel him watch. Eventually, he left and closed the door behind him. I was too scared to move, even after I couldn't hear them anymore and fell asleep. The following morning, I told my friend what had happened, but since nothing had been taken, no one believed me, not even her parents. 2 facts. 1, at that time there were several incidents of junkies breaking into people's houses in search of quick money. 2, everybody in town knew where they kept the spare key. Her parents had money, but they were really cheap, so they didn't have any valuables in the house, no jewelry, nothing. I'm not surprised nothing was taken. It's always unsettling to feel like your safety has been compromised. It's too bad that no one believed you when you told them what had happened. It's possible that the intruders were just looking for a quick score, but it's still a very unsettling experience. It's good that nothing was taken, but that doesn't make the situation any less frightening. Story 6. When the doctor told me my best friend of 18 years wasn't gonna live, then this other time, I was driving home from school. I drove an hour and 30 minutes one way to get there, and I was there for 8 hours a day. I didn't always get enough sleep. Something caught my attention in the car that wasn't on the road. Honestly, I think I may have fallen asleep for a split second. When my eyes focused in front of me again, there were giant concrete blocks. The highway was under construction. I was going 70 miles per hour. I panicked, slammed my foot on the brake, looked over to make sure that there was no one to the side, and I swerved to the left to avoid hitting the blocks. I lost control of the car, and all I could think was, oh my god, this isn't a dream. I'm really gonna die. This was all happening on an overpass. I was trying to regain control, but the car ended up slamming into the wall of the overpass. The entire front end of my car was smashed, my airbag deployed, and I remember it felt like I was inhaling fire. I jumped out of my car as fast as I could, ran to the other side of the overpass, crumpled up in a ball, and I just started crying. What surprised me the most, though, was how many cars just decided to drive right past me, as if nothing happened. A few minutes later, a woman ran up to me, wrapped her arms around me, and she held me until the ambulance got there. Story 7. A few years ago, I used to compete in 600cc motorcycle road races with my best friend. One day at a practice session on a local race circuit, he didn't come back to the pit lane after a track session. I was busy working on my bike while he was out on track. So after a while, I went to find him, assuming his bike had broken down. As I was walking to the track marshal's office, I saw the wreckage of his bike in the back of the recovery truck. It was very badly smashed up. I asked the marshal what happened to the rider. He told me that my friend had been taken to the local hospital by the medics, and that the crash had been pretty messy. I have known my best friend's family since childhood, and the reason he got into bikes in the first place was because of me. In the hour it took me to get to the hospital and find him, all I could think about was what I'd say to his mother if the worst had happened. Turned out, he just had a concussion and a broken ankle, but that hour was far scarier than any of the times I crashed a bike myself. I'm glad to hear that your friend ended up being okay, even if he did have a concussion and a broken ankle. It must have been a huge relief to find out that he wasn't more seriously hurt. It's never easy to see someone you care about in pain, especially when it's something that you both love doing together. Maybe this experience helped both of you appreciate the dangers of the sport even more, and take extra precautions to stay safe. Story 8. When I was 17, I was sitting on top of the local headlands with my girlfriend. She got up and walked to the edge to take a photograph and tripped over. Watching her disappear over the edge and then hearing the thump as she hit the ground was sickening. I ran to the nearest house and got them to call an ambulance and raced down to the ground where she fell. She was unconscious and had a massive gash just above her hip, but was still breathing. Eventually, she was airlifted to the hospital. It was touch and go for about 3 weeks after the accident, but she eventually made a foolish recovery. Lost a kidney and spleen, now has artificial joints, but no brain or spinal damage. I've been in a few hairy situations in my time, but from the moment she disappeared over the edge until the moment I got to the body, not knowing whether she was dead or dying, or whether I would be able to help her once I had arrived at the scene, was easily the most terrifying moment of my life. Story 9. I fell through a frozen lake while ice skating. After sinking approximately nipples deep, my skates touched down on a wildly convenient placed sandbar in the middle of the lake. 2 inches forward or back, and I would have sank like a rock. A guy from my high school, not really a friend, just a guy I rode the bus with, grabbed a hockey stick and pulled me out. It was an incredibly risky and brave thing for him to do. He was a big guy, and the ice was super thin everywhere within arm's reach of where I was standing. He used to get teased a little in high school, but that mostly subsided after I told half the school that he saved my life the day before. One afternoon, a few months later, someone was bad-mouthing him, and I said, "He saved my life one afternoon. WTF have you ever done?" Well, I gotta say, falling through a frozen lake sounds like a nightmare to me. I mean, what if the sandbar wasn't there? That would have been a real ice-cold ending. And to be honest, anyone who saves a life deserves some major respect. So let's give it up for the big guy with the hockey stick. And remember, don't underestimate the power of a sandbar. Story 10. My wife's belly was cut open on the OR table, and her blood was splashing everywhere in thick, gooey splurts. Our daughter wasn't breathing. Hardest decision in my life. They rushed each of them into different rooms, and I could only go with one. Second scariest. I woke up. The car rolled 1.5 times, landing on the roof, in a ditch by the side of the highway. I undid the seatbelt and promptly fell into the seat. I tried to open the doors, but they were all stuck. The aforementioned ditch. I'm not usually claustrophobic, but for a split second, I knew I was gonna die a long, slow death by asphyxiation. Story 11. I killed a man in a fight in North Korea, beat him in the head with a crowbar until his brains came out. We were being assaulted and our food looted. UN food ate ship. As we were preparing to leave the port, kicking guys off the ship to raise the gangway. A few guys came after me and my shit, and I had to defend myself. I still feel bad about it, but trust me, it was me or him. Other guys on the ship got very seriously injured and had to be helicoptered to Seoul as soon as we got out to sea and past the exclusion zone. Taking someone's life, even in self-defense, is never an easy thing to cope with. It's understandable that you feel remorseful and saddened by what happened. It's important to remember that you did what you had to do to protect yourself and others on the ship. Remember that it's okay to feel a range of emotions, and to take the time to heal and move forward. Story 12. I'm not even sure I should answer this question, but here goes. My ex-husband made me a drink, a really strong one, and told me to drink it. That was unusual. Then he let some guys in the house. I don't really know how many, more than 4. I passed out from the pain, I think. I'm not sure. Sometimes he shut my windpipe until I passed out, and he may have done so that night too. I was struggling pretty hard, and I'm pretty strong for my size. Story 13. When I was about 4, I was walking with my dad down the street and some guy walked by and kicked me, and I slipped into an open sewer. I don't think I fell all the way in. My dad kicked that guy's ass pretty good, I've been told. He was really into judo back then. Story 14. Being caught in a rip current when there was no lifeguard on duty, and I was exhausted to begin with. After a few minutes of being very frightened, I was finally able to swim to shore. Story 15. After my brother was found dead, I didn't think the police believed me when I told them it was an accident. Every time I go back to the US, I worry they might be waiting for me. Story 16. The time the cops let themselves into my house and bedroom with weapons drawn to serve an arrest warrant for someone who didn't live there. Story 17. Lightning struck less than 20 feet away from me, knocked me off my feet, and deafened me for about 5 minutes. Story 18. Realizing that I was going the wrong way on a 3-lane one-way street, at night, in the rain, in a compact car. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.